Hello, principals on the Bronson School District Board. My name is Miss Guerra,
I'm Mr. Anderson.
And I'm Mr. Carrillo.
and we're going to be showing you the Historical Responsive Learning Framework, also known as HRL.
It focuses on things such as identity, skills, criticality, intellect, but most importantly, how do we implement joy into the classroom?
Welcome back. The first part of the HRL framework that we'll be discussing today is identity. And a way that we chose to implement identity into our classrooms is through the students' own creation of these identity flowers. As you can see, the students put their name in the middle of the flower because you are at the center of your own identity and everything about your identity revolves around you. Each petal, as you can tell, is filled in by the students and they get to choose what they put in, and they also get to choose how many petals they use. This student, for example, used the example of the color blue. They like to play Roblox, they like to participate in cheer, they are the oldest in their family out of their kids, and they like to eat pizza. And you can also see that this person includes some different factors of identity, as in they wrote their mom, the name of some of their friends, and even the name of some of their pets.
Mr. Carrillo, can you explain a little bit more about that?
Sure, but first, the focus is that students get to describe their identity and we do not describe it for them. And that matters because Goldie says, identity is fluid, multi-layered, and relational. Also, it is also shaped by the social and cultural environment as well as by literacy practices.
Yummy. Another activity that the students can do along with these flowers is making webs that connect the flower petals to see that each student has commonalities. It could be something simple as playing video games or having a favorite color. This way the students can physically see that, oh, Mr. Anderson flower and Mr. Carrillo's flower have connections within each other. This creates a safe classroom community.
This activity is also a good example when you want to show, for example, one student put that she likes dogs as her favorite animal, and one student put that she likes cats as her favorite animal. This can also be used to show that while identities are different, that's okay, right? And we're all trying to learn together.
Mm-hmm.
And then to quote what Goldie says, knowing about the cultures of other people teaches them how to respect, love, and live in harmony with others who don't look or know the world as they do.
And as students get older, it is more important they learn to socialize with each other, especially because we want to get them to that level where they can work with any coworker they come across.
Now that we have discussed identity, we can move on to the second part of the HRL framework. This is skills. We plan to implement this in our classroom by the classroom arrangement. We can change the classroom arrangement to build social skills such as communication, fairness, and empathy. For example of how we used to have classroom arrangements in literacy, it was straight rows and columns, no grouping, kids were a single file, and you were just mainly working independent.
Now, Ms. Gore, how could you break this tradition and change your classroom arrangement?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I was sick of not getting the social skills I needed when I was in high school or even middle school, so I made up my own. The colored boxes are the tables and the X's are students. This allows grouping of fours so that the students can build these social skills with each other. This will create a good, safe environment for students to build those communication skills, empathy skills, and fairness skills.
But why does this matter? Well, Goldie says the skills are central to the ways in which we do school today and typically define achievement standards. But the way our classroom is implementing those is by not only changing the classroom arrangement, but ensuring that the teacher supports students in building those communication skills, being fair with each other, and once again, feeling empathy for one another. Welcome back. We talked about identity and skills, but now it's time to talk about the third part of the HRL framework, criticality. Criticality in our classroom and in our school, it focuses on changing the curriculum from fact-based to inquiry-based. And like Goldie says, Ms. Guerrero, what does she say?
The great Goldie says, criticality helps students read the world with a critical eye, refusing to accept unexamined information as factual or true. Therefore, students are able to hone in on their research and check the validity of their sources as well as the work they have done.
Now, Mr. Carrillo, how do you implement this into your classroom?
Well, in my most recent science lab, we focused on gravity. And inquiry came into play when students were able to understand and explore the concept of gravity as a force and how it affects objects on Earth. Criticality came into play once students were able to draw conclusions.
Whoa. Slow down. How did you even begin this lesson?
I'm glad you said that. Every lesson I conduct now focuses on a lunch, an interesting lunch that gets students engaged, not only physically but mentally as well based on their interests, once again focusing on that inquiry base. This lunch I conducted here was using a discrepant event, and the question task was, if I were on top of the US Bank and dropped an orange and a cotton ball, which would drop first? No other information was given, no other details. As I was saying, criticality came into play when students were able to draw conclusions and validate their own work. Without any prior knowledge about gravity, students were able to drop two objects from different heights and analyze which factors from the Earth affected those objects. Their conclusions prove that not only gravity acts on you when you drop or fall, but also air resistance. Those two ideas came into play together, back to the discrepant event we talked about at the beginning of the lesson. In the beginning of the lesson, remember, we talked about the penny and the cotton ball. Students were able to not only not make conclusions, but also dig more than they should have. How? Well, students are now not only thinking about gravity as a pull factor when you fall, but now also air resistance. So now all types of conclusions were being made across the classroom. In this activity, students were to stand on the opposite side of the walls, defending their argument using evidence from the lab, another factor that we use a lot in literacy instruction.
Welcome back to part 2, principals. I'm Ms. Guerra.
I'm Mr. Anderson.
And I'm Mr. Carrillo.
Let us do a little recap about what we have learned so far.
So we're walking you down through the HRL framework presented by Goli Mohammed. And last week we talked about identity, skills, and criticality. And if you recall identity, we talked about the identity flower here that my colleague Mr. Anderson talked about. And we talked about how the identity flower works with students so that they can identify themselves through art. And not only that, but create social skills when they compare their differences and similarities with other students. We moved into talking to skills, and in skills we focused on classroom management and how Ms. Guerra changed her classroom layout in order to best accommodate her students' needs.
Yummy.
Now that her classroom is in different position and in different arrangements, she is now reaching better potential for her students and better learning outcomes are in the classroom. Moving down to criticality, we talked about my lesson planning in science and how my lesson planning now aims at the inquiry of the children, not only them allowing them to build their own conclusions, but also investigate their own thoughts through exploration. Next, Mr. Anderson will explain what we're going to talk about today and how the full circle of the HRL framework comes together to build better classrooms.
So today we're going to be talking about the last two aspects of the HRL framework. The first one we're going to be talking about is intellect, and we will be discussing how we implement that into our social studies curriculum. And then the second aspect we will be talking about is joy, and we will be talking about and showing you how we implemented joy into our daily schedules at our school.
Stay tuned.
All right, so let's move into intellect and how we are implementing that part of the HRL framework in our classrooms. In the intro, I mentioned that our curriculum is very important to us, especially now that we're modifying it so it best fits the needs of our students. I talked about our curriculum so much because now we are creating an interdisciplinary curriculum, which means that we are combining social studies, science, and literacy all in one, so that students are able to best learn about their impact on society. The project they're working on is called Sustainable Society Project in Social Studies, and we are teaching our students about their impact on society, even from the smallest details in life. They need to talk about how their impact leaves a footprint every time, how their decision making is important, and how their environmental societal impact is different depending on where they are or how they live or how much money they make, depending on who the person is. Ms. Guerra will present the project a little bit, just the outline, and then we'll go from there.
So students are learning how to build these fundamental decision-making skills. In social studies, it is important to show that students are an active member of society. As adults, I make coffee every single morning. And Mr. Anderson, would you like to pull up the coffee filter? A cup of coffee takes one of these filters a day. An easy switch to a reusable filter could be a reusable coffee filter. Showing this to students and having them think of other ideas to brainstorm what they could change to make a switch from disposable versus reusable. Giving students these small decision makings is important because they are little humans, they are little people, and learning their place in society. Thank
That
you,
being
Mr. Hanson.
said, we are asking our students to use intellect in order to find the best decision available. Once they find the best decision available, we're also asking them how are they looking at consequences. You might have heard of the backwards design for lesson planning or for implementing curriculum in your classroom. Backwards design works when you first look at your outcome and then make a plan for action. Contrary, humanity or students are used to taking action and then paying the consequences of their outcome. We want to make sure our students are able to look at the desirable outcomes first before making that plan for action, similar to how we lesson plan. Goldie says, historically it was necessary to cultivate intellectualism because society and oppressors did not see black people as useful, smart, or capable of rigorous learning. Curriculum in our classroom used to be built for not all of our students, where we are making sure that every student is given the chance now to use their intellect in order to make those decisions that are powerful in everyday life.
Yummy.
Next, we will talk about joy. Mr. Anderson will talk about some shifts in their schedules and how those are making our students feel more comfortable in their school where we want them to feel at home.
Okay, so recently when we were looking around our classrooms, we noticed that there seemed to be a little bit of joy lacking in some of our classrooms, and we weren't really sure what we could do. Well, after reading up on the HRL framework and working to implement it, we found a couple different ways to implement joy into our schedules. A big one that we do. Sorry about that. We were experiencing some technical issues.
Computers, guys, sorry.
It happens. We're not computer
Technology.
geniuses over here, right? We're just trying to implement some HRL framework into our classrooms, right? So, where we left off, we just got done talking about the student of the month, student of the week, and now here are some other ways that we implement joy into our classrooms. One way is we try to make learning meaningful, right? A lot of kids come to school and the learning's not meaningful to them. They just sit there, they're bored, they're sleepy, whatever, right? Not paying attention. An example that Mr. Carrillo used in his classroom, he was teaching about the American Revolution, and he decided to have some students create a TikTok kind of reenactment thing. I don't know, I'm not on that app, don't know what it is, but the kids really seemed to be into it, so they seemed really engaged in that lesson. They talked about key events, and they even had a little debate between some of the historical figures in the American Revolution. Another way that we implemented it into our classroom was using, again, kind of like the other example, interactive and engaging activities. Miss Guerra in her classroom set up a survival challenge where she had different students design some sort of creature, imaginary creature, and it was able to adapt to different environments as it moves. So they really liked that. They got to bring in props, all this fun stuff. So really engaging, really bringing joy into the classroom. And one of the last things that we did to implement joy into our classroom was creating a positive classroom culture. And obviously that relates to what we were talking about earlier. But we also do something called weekend wins, where we have students share something positive from the weekend, whether it was small, like I got my homework done, or it was big, like we just moved to a new house or something like that, right? So we try to incorporate students' daily lives outside of school into the classroom to help implement that joy.
Now, let me take it from here. Mr. Anderson talked about how we are implementing the classroom, but I want to focus really on the idea of interdisciplinary curriculum, right? He talked about making learning more meaningful, and that's how we're doing it in social studies, right? With the American Revolution and the TikToks that they're creating in their classroom. We also talk about being interactive and engaging in the activities, and how they create a survival challenge of an organism in society and an organism in the world, and how they're adapting to their world, right? And that's another factor of science. Moving into literacy with weekend wins, students are now being asked to either journal or speak publicly, which is another aspect of literacy. You want to be able to speak and listen, but you also want to be good at writing. Now, we're going to ask you, the audience, wherever you're watching us from, a computer or phone, we don't care. We really just appreciate that you're here. we're going to bring our QR code here and ask you to please give us your feedback of how you plan to implement the HRL framework in the classroom. So please scan that QR code and we'll give you a couple minutes to throw some ideas into the Padlet. Thank you. All right, so I asked you to please give us some ideas on how you will implement the HR framework in your classroom. So we are going to go ahead and read some of the responses we got and we thought were the most in alignment with what we talked about in this conference.
So the first response we have is from Principal Jordan Williams from Milwaukee Academy of Greatness. And he said he plans to implement the framework by focusing on culturally and historically responsive literacy in his social studies classroom. He mentioned his students have diverse backgrounds, so he wants to make sure that they see themselves in the curriculum every day. And he said one way he plans on doing this is by using primary sources from a variety of different perspectives while teaching about U.S. history, such as some indigenous accounts of colonization, as long as the European natives. And then he'll also be using some storytelling projects from the students to help connect historical events to their own personal experiences.
Another response that we have from Alexis Navin from the school Seeds of Health Elementary: I will implement the HRL framework by using the JOY principle to make learning more engaging for my students. Love it. Many of them struggle with motivation, so I want to bring in activities that foster creativity and play. For example, during our science unit on ecosystems, I plan to have students design their own ideal species with adaptations suited for a specific environment. This hands-on, imaginative approach will not only make learning fun, but also encourage critical thinking and problem-solving skills. I love the usage of the vocabulary.
Last but not least, Mr. Daniel Martinez from Forest Home Avenue School, he says, as a future educator, I want to ensure my classroom promotes intellectualism by encouraging deep inquiry-based learning. One way I will implement the HRL framework is by designing student-led discussions and debates. Instead of just memorizing facts, my students will analyze different viewpoints and defend their perspectives using evidence. This will empower them to become independent thinkers who can apply knowledge beyond the classroom. Now, once again, the focus here is creating interdisciplinary curriculum that best fits your students' needs, right? Mr. Martinez is working with literacy, Mr. Alexis is working with science, and remind me of the name, sorry. Mr. Jordan Williams is working with the social studies framework to make the HR framework fit into their curriculum.
All right, let's do a little recap about what we have learned so far from the HRL framework. First,
So the first thing we talked about was identity. We talked about how we implemented that into our classrooms through the identity flower, where students use words to describe who they are. And we do not describe any of that for them. It is all from their mind.
moving on to the next one is skills. This one I focus on classroom arrangement, especially in literacy, to arrange the seats so that my students can cooperatively learn. Doing this provides a safe and fair classroom.
Next, criticality is something we also talked about, and I talked about how my science lessons are changing from fact-based into inquiry-based lessons. This allows children to not only evaluate their decisions, but also explore their thoughts through exploration of the concepts. Moving into intellect, I also talked about the Sustainable Society Project, where students are now also thinking about decision-making and how we are combining curriculums in order to make it more adaptable and fit our students' needs.
And the last thing we talked about today was joy. And basically we mentioned all the different ways that we implemented it, to the student of the week or the month, to our weekend wins, to making the material more engaging. And overall, the biggest thing is to make the students feel seen every day in what you are teaching them.
Now, taking what you have learned from my colleagues and I in this HRL framework, I have one question to ask. How are your students feeling confident in knowing themselves?
We invite you to come and visit our school anytime you want. We really want you to have a first-hand experience of how this HRL framework really improves the learning outcomes of our students. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.